Biden kills the 1776 project that would have taught actual history to kids instead of left-wing ideology, calling it bigotry. Now, I understand his beef. An actual history curriculum would teach kids about undermined elections and questionable presidential results. Can't have that now, can we? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone. And welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around le monde. Today we start with American history and Joe Biden's latest comments that any school curriculum that promotes American pride and exceptionalism is, quote, offensive and counterfactual. So it's offensive now to be a patriotic American. It's offensive now to see how many ways the United States of America has lifted civilization. I mean, look, Joe, the fact is that people are risking their lives to come here. They are literally waging shark-infested waters between Cuba and Florida to get here because of what we've built. Now, you can pretend that that's offensive, but you can't pretend that it's counterfactual. The facts are in, President Biden. It's a pretty exceptional society where a guy like you, after all your scandals and lies, a guy like you whose family has completely and illegally enriched themselves off of foreign connections.
Such joy and optimism here on the Dr. Duke Show. As we've talked about, the 1776 project basically was a response to the New York Times' 1619 project, where they claim that the U.S. started back in 1619 and we're all a bunch of racists because slavery. Whereas the 1776 project was talking about, the actual history of America. Good, bad, and the ugly.
The funny thing is, 1619, created by journalists at the New York Times. Speaking of counterfactual, the words journalist and New York Times are about as counterfactual as you're going to get.
Great lady.
And the 1776 curriculum, of course, was created by history-minded people, history professors. Go figure.
Yeah, here's how racist it is. In the section of the 1776 Commission's report on the Constitution, here's what these bigots had to say. The bedrock upon which the American political system is built is the rule of law. The vast difference between tyranny and the rule of law is a central theme of political thinkers back to classical antiquity. The idea that the law is superior to rulers is the cornerstone of English constitutional thought as it developed over the centuries. The concept was transferred to the American colonies and can be seen expressed throughout colonial pamphlets and political writings. Bigots.
Yeah, I'd like to reemphasize that. What sets the American Constitution apart, it is rule of law, not rule by theocrats like in Iran, not rule by parties like the Communist Party in China, and now, unfortunately, rule of technology in this country. What we are all about is rule by law. The fact that these big tech companies are impervious to law because they are quote-unquote private entities shows you what kind of governments the founding fathers were wary of. Beware of a government by anything other than laws. The fact that you have two sets of laws, one for average citizens, one for elites, tells you we are not constitutionally bound still.
And if we wanted to go back to that whole thinking part, our political thinkers back then were smart enough to know that we should not give our government structure over to specific people like a monarchy or an oligarchy or any of that, but what is it? This thing called a republic, where it is, as you say, a set of laws. So we're not bound by the person, but by the idea.
So, for instance, if we were bound by laws, we would be mandated by our laws to, police our borders. One of the few things that the federal government was asked to do, not what Biden does and throw it open. If we actually were constrained by the Constitution, it would be impossible to impeach a guy who's no longer impeachable and no longer a president. But you can see the many, many ways in which the Constitution has been. Another thing we would do if we were a constitutional republic, we would take seriously our voter laws. We would take seriously claims of cheating in our elections, which we no longer do either, because we are no longer a government of rules. We are a government of men. In this case, Democrat men.
I wouldn't even go so far as to say Democrat.
Yeah,
men.
well, I wouldn't go so far.
I wouldn't even say men.
I wouldn't go so far as to call Joe Biden company men either. So I guess we're on the same page there.
There you go. But we've talked about this many a time. Every couple weeks, we basically remind you that this is what is happening in our country today. And it's not just, oh, this is like the newspapers and the media versus each other, and it's kind of like a bicker. No, this is how they are teaching our children.
Yep.
This is coming down. This is the curriculum. It's not just, oh, we put out the 1619 project for funsies. No, they intend to have that as the curriculum in the schools being taught to your children.
The only curriculum your kids lead. Lincoln was right. We are only as good as our history. We are what our history tells us we are. And for 250 years almost, we told ourselves we were better. We were better than we were not because we were infallible as people, but because our founding documents were going to make everyone better over time. That's gone now. Lincoln was right, although Lincoln's been canceled himself. Lincoln was right that the philosophy of government in one generation, just one generation is all it takes. The philosophy of government in the schools is the philosophy of government in the country. Whatever the kids taught, that's what they're going to grow up. We've had 40, 50 years, 2 or 3 generations of kids now who've grown up hating their country, ignorant of what it stands for, and who buy the facile lies of liberal progressive social reformers that this country is nothing but racism. It was a war we had. One of the main things that Donald Trump did try to do was to balance out the 1619 curriculum, which is full of lies, ideology, downright insultingly bad, shoddy scholarship and bad history. We're trying to balance that out with 1776 program. Of course, when Joe Biden takes office, what does he do? He kills 1776, authentic history, because the lies of 1619 benefit him and his radical leftist reformers.
So it's Black History Month across the nation, February is, and that means it's a perfect time for Black Lives Matter to continue doing what they do every single day by pushing their curriculum into your kids' schools. And so we have an example coming out of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District, where the students there, elementary students, were being taught about Black History Month. Okay, fine. The important role of Black Lives Matter and how, their important role and plays in the racial justice movement. And of course, this was all in science class because it's in every class. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not just, it's Black History Month. Maybe in history class, we take a little time to learn about things that have happened. No, every single class, almost every single day, must somehow be talking about this.
It's time to wake up, America, with the 1619 curriculum that will come to your school if it's not there every day already. Every day in every subject, 365 days, every subject, every day is Black Lives Matter propaganda now. That's what we're doing.
And so these students, at the end of science class, had to read about the impact of Black Lives Matter. They watched a young Black poet speak at Joe Biden's inauguration. Everyone was ranting and raving about her. And they had to discuss issues of racism that continue to plague the school. As you see there, the impact of words on BLM. This was a slide. It said BLM's mission is to get rid of white supremacy and come together to fight and end the violence against Black communities. Many peaceful protests took place in May and June of 2020. Oh, many peaceful ones.
Peaceful.
Many peaceful. Also, several, more than a handful, not so peaceful. But they don't include that. The media broadcasted the riots and the looting instead of the peaceful fight towards equality. Oh, how dare they?
I'm sorry, I don't see in this write-up, which on their own platform, where does it talk about globalism? Where does it talk about ending capitalism? Where does it talk about literally decentering the traditional family? One of the major goals of Black Lives Matter is to end the mom, dad, baby dynamic of the family. Those things didn't appear in that little blurb. I wonder if they learned when they were praising Black Lives Matter in science class in elementary school. I wonder if they learned those things as well.
Yeah, well, before we get to the video, at the end of the whole reading of the slide, watching the video, the students had to sign a form acknowledging that hashtag words matter. And you may be like, well, okay, what is hashtag words matter? Well, it's a left-wing activist slogan initially aimed at stopping people from using the words illegal immigrant to describe an immigrant who has illegally crossed the border.
I prefer illegal alien.
Well, activists prefer the term undocumented.
Oh, of course, right.
The campaign has since morphed into the broader idea that the wrong words, regardless of whether they have malicious intent and regardless of context, can be harmful to racial justice.
You're forcing elementary school kids to sign their name in a legal contract, effectively.
They can't even write.
Which you would consider some kind of a contract between them and them. They're too young. They cannot enter into these kind of contracts. I get it. In a court of law, this would never stand. But the fact that you're forcing little tiny elementary school kids to sign on to your nonsense is highly manipulative. It's a form of child abuse in my mind.
And we know that the kids aren't understanding really what's happening because one parent actually explained how their child told them what they did. My child's takeaway is that if anyone finds out their parents voted for Donald Trump, they won't have any friends and they'll be ostracized. I don't know why science teachers are promoting Black Lives Matter.
Nobody knows, except the liberal progressive communists who are going to take over this country. That's what they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. How do you destroy country? You first of all destroy faith in its institutions. Then you change those institutions for radical left-wing ones. Like the ones that make 6-year-olds sign contracts.
But as I said, there is plenty more. The kids also got to watch a 9-minute video. Again, elementary kids. 9-minute video. It talks supposedly about police brutality and the effects on Black Americans. Take a look.
Interpersonal racism, expressing bigoted ideas, is widely seen as unacceptable. Nowadays, these people would probably lose their jobs over this kind of behavior. But the protests we're seeing today aren't really about that sort of thing. They're about structural racism in our society. A built-in system of bias that makes life easier for white people and more difficult for Black people and other people of color. It puts them at greater risk for poverty, unemployment, and disease. Structural racism is a factor in some disturbing trends. Black people are nearly 6 times more likely than whites to be imprisoned. And Black men are killed by police at more than twice the rate of white men. Like on May 25th, 2020. That's when a Black man named George Floyd died in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was killed by a white police officer. And protests have spread from Minneapolis to cities all around the world. Thousands of marches took place in the month following Floyd's death. These demonstrations have been overwhelmingly peaceful. Though, if you've been watching the news, you might think it's all been riots.
Yeah.
My God, that was propaganda worthy of Joseph Goebbels. I ticked off 7 different shady arguments. So, okay.
7?
So George Floyd was sitting there with a mustache and without a mustache in parallel images, sitting on a couch smiling when the cops came and stomped the life out of him. No toxicology, no. Maybe if we showed, how about a drunken, drug-addled George Floyd threatening people on the street?
Level of fentanyl
How about
in
that?
the system.
How about that? How about,
level.
you know what they never did, by the way? They never did in that whole video explain what systemic racism is. This systemic racism is the problem. We're not going to tell, this is a science class. We're not going to give you proof of what that is. We're not going to explain to you how that works. We're just going to say, we're going to tell you statistical lies, right? That Black men are twice as much likely to get shot. That is absolutely not true. There are more white people shot every year by cops than Blacks. Last year, there's a grand total of 13 African Americans shot, and not all of them, most of them were carrying guns at the time. This idea that these lies that you're peddling to little children are lies that are going to get this country completely sunk.
Well, yeah, and that was like a minute of 9-minute video. The narrator uses the Minneapolis City Council defunding the police as an example of victory for our, racial justice.
And what's going on in Minneapolis
so
right now? Right now in the news today, Minneapolis is trying to find money to hire more cops. Is that going to make your because what did Minneapolis find out, little snowflake narrator? They found out that without cops, there's more violence against Black people. And so what is the Minneapolis City Council trying to do? Hire more cops after they fired and chased away so many. But that won't make your little docudrama. I seriously doubt that the kids will learn that.
But if you take a look at what's been happening in this area for this school district, it all makes sense. And we've talked about how you need to pay attention now because what may seem is just like, oh, they're just doing that. It's not, oh, they're signing a petition. Who cares? Okay. It escalates quickly to this level and beyond. Already back in June, the activists in Northern California. They were lobbying the school district to take a more socially radical stance. And they started a racial justice petition. Ooh, a racial justice petition. And they wanted a district-wide review of curriculum. They asked the district to reduce the dominance of white and European history. And of course, here's a list of demands. That simply includes a couple of these. Take a more aggressive approach in teaching students about racism, microaggressions, and racial class privilege, both in and out of the classroom. Looks like they're doing that right now. They want the school district to hire more self-identified people of color so that the percentage of minority teachers is reflective of the national population. Self-identified.
Rachel Dolezal was in the news.
Rachel
she
needs
can't
a job.
find a job. She self-identifies as black.
So she needs a job.
There you
Hire
go.
her up. All
There's
right.
your answer.
They also demand to formally acknowledge the indigenous histories of the lands on which the school sits.
See, the problem is there is no history. There's no history.
We're not supposed to teach history, I thought.
Well,
Or
teach more
teach history, but not history.
Teach more history where there's only oral legend, right?
Teach herstory. So, and they want to divert funding for police to social workers and support systems for students of color, which is exactly what Black Lives Matter states. So, if you are sitting at home right now saying, as you know what, as you comment right now in the video, not in my school district, I wouldn't allow that for my kids. These people are crazy. It's happening in your school district, and these people are still crazy.
And the bigger question is that they're doing this. This is what your kid's education is primarily about now. This is not an afternoon thing once a month. This is not an occasional thing just for Black Lives Matter month for February. This is not something that just happens every now and then. This is the entire intellectual foundation of how your kids are taught right now. In good conscience, how can you send your kids to those schools? How can you send them day in and day out to these factories of hate, intolerance, indifference, anti-education, childish videos like this? It's deceptive.
So this is a little awkward. Churchill College, which is part of the University of Cambridge, kind of had an online talk where the academics involved kind of said that Winston Churchill, again, Churchill College, Winston Churchill was a white supremacist, and he was far worse than Nazi Germany. You heard me correct. Churchill College.
Yeah, you did hear that right. So Winston Churchill, who literally stood as one man fighting against the internationally, one man who put his hand up to Hitler and said no, one man who kept England together during the Blitz, one man who knew that the faux liberalism of Neville Chamberlain was just a disaster, that enabled rather than tried to stop what was going on in the Nazi era. Churchill did all that, but he's worse than the Nazis. Why? Because he has made comments praising the Empire of Britain. So see, Churchill's not responsible for ending the Nazi threat. He's just a racist. And because he actually had good things to say about the Empire period in British culture, he's a monster worse than Hitler. You see how lefties think right now?
So there was a Zoom discussion, and the academics had the title of this little talk called "The Racial Consequences of Mr. Churchill." Not Sir, not Prime Minister, not any of that, just Mr. Churchill. And the discussion was led by Priyamvada Gopal.
In fact, the entire panel were Indian English people, right? People who had suffered under the boot heel of colonialism. We're going to telling English kids just how bad Churchill was.
Yes, also on the panel was Onyeka Nubia, Kahindi Andrews, and Madhusri Mukherjee. Well, hopefully I pronounced any of those names correctly. We've talked about Gopal before. She had actually tweeted last year that white lives don't matter.
Yep, and got promoted to full professor because of it.
Yeah,
isn't that nice?
There was a petition to fire her, so of course, naturally.
Of course.
Full professor. She's the one who led this discussion. And her tweet after the discussion basically held her viewpoint that Winston Churchill is absolutely worse than the Nazis. Was Churchill a white supremacist? If we just go by his own words, manifestly so. Thanks. She's so nice. Okay, but to get to the rest of them, because they all provided a lot for the Zoom conversation. So we'll go quickly, one by one. Nubia spent time talking about the bloodlines of Churchill and critiqued his use of Anglo-Saxon race in his books. Nubia accused him of having strong ideal about ethnicity and race, which were particular to a kind of Anglophile, Eurocentric, white supremacist perspective.
In other words, he believes there was such a thing as Anglo-Saxon culture, and he defended it, and that makes him a racist.
And he was born in, 1874-ish?
Well, I got news for you.
So there's that.
I got news for you, panelists. There is such a thing as Anglo-Saxon culture. The French and the Germans are forever lecturing us on America and England that we're part of an Anglo-Saxon alliance. So it's a real thing. You may not like it. You may want to cancel it. You may want to erase it, but it's a real thing.
All right, we'll get to Mukherjee, who is an Indian-born physicist, but is based in Germany right now. Mukherjee blamed Churchill for the Bengal famine, which she focused her talk on how it was being, a humanitarian disaster. And she didn't mention at all about the weather that was happening and how the rice crop was destroyed. That also may have contributed to a famine, but it's all Winston Churchill.
Yep.
He's the sole man.
And people like that are big fans of Stalin, who starved to death the entire Ukraine in the Holodomor. Not a word to say about Stalin, no, but you're going to hold Winston Churchill personally responsible for that particular famine.
But of all the panelists, Andrews is as the article said, the media darling.
Yes.
So
now,
let's talk about Andrews.
He's not Indian, right?
No.
He's African American.
He's Britain's inaugural professor of Black Studies.
Black Studies. There you go.
He's just touted around of Black Studies. He's known across Britain for claiming everything is racist, including the Enlightenment. That's racist. Everything's racist. So on Churchill, he says, really, the argument that I want to make is that if you think about Churchill, there's no debate about his white supremacy. The question here is, why does Churchill still hold the level of popularity he does?
Wait. You're there to tell us why we should hate him, and then you say there's no debate. You're there to convince us that you're right, but you're not going to debate it.
The argument is not an argument at all. It's just de facto.
It's a statement.
It's almost like he's been beatified, a saintly figure who's beyond reproach. And then he claims that he wasn't even that popular at the time, and he was never elected.
Huh?
Never elected. Let's just go back. Yep, he's a member of parliament and got elected there. So yeah, he's been elected many a time. Anyway, and he also states that the argument I'm going to make here is that it's all because he kind of is the perfect embodiment of white supremacy.
Right, that's the only thing. And and by the way, if he's the embodiment of white supremacy and a factor of white supremacy is to defy Nazism, which doesn't make any sense, then call me a Nazi and a white supremacist. If Churchill's brand of defying the real white supremacist, Hitler, makes him a white supremacist, then go ahead. And I'm sure Kendi will have no problem calling all of us bigots too.
It's time for some real education, and in the words of Whitesnake, here I go again. We're continuing with G.K. Chesterton Week here on Instant Classics, and if you don't know by now, G.K. is Gilbert Keith Chesterton. He was an English philosopher, a theologian and art critic, a preeminent Christian apologist. Dr. Duke, tell us more.
Born in 1874, died in 1936. Chesterton is really one of the great voices of the 20th century, standing athwart the tide of progressivism, which would lead to things like Nazism and communism and all the great plagues of the 20th century. This is Chesterton Week, as Katie said, and so during Chesterton Week, we want to take a good long look at what this remarkable thinker and writer had to say. And so for this particular day in Chesterton Week, I want to go back to a quote, and it says this, quote, "I believe what really happens in history is this. The old man is always wrong, and the young people are always wrong about what's wrong with him." Look at what we just did with our segment on Churchill, right? Churchill is always wrong for having been an old white man, and these young punk academics must be right in condemning him. I believe, Chesterton wrote, I believe that what really happens in history is this. The old man is always wrong, and the young people are always wrong about what is wrong with him. The practical form that takes is this, that while the old man may stand by some stupid custom, the young man always attacks it with some theory that turns out to be equally stupid. Welcome to the modern academy. Professoriate 101. This is your colleges and your university. Just take a look at the segment we just did on Churchill at Churchill College being undone by a group of snot-nosed academics using critical race theory. It always ends the same way. Chesterton realized 100 years ago that that's what was going to happen.
All right, just a quick reminder to please download our brand new Freedom Project Media app. All you have to do is use the camera on your smart device to take a picture of one of the QR codes that is right for you. You'll get access to 15 new shows a week, plus our library of content that includes in-depth interviews, lecture series, educational animations, tons of other things. And all you have to do is download the Freedom Project app in your app store and make sure to allow for notifications. And if you're a fan of the show, please consider a one-time tax-deductible donation to support the Patriot Club, help keep this show going, and we're going to send you, as a little thank you, our signature tumbler. Visit patriotclub.us to get signed up. That's patriotclub.us. Now, we want to take a moment to show some love to our Patriot Club members because they keep this show going. And today, we're giving a shout out to Sonia from Edmond, Oklahoma. Sonia, thank you.
For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, mes amis.